Hello, and welcome to Conversations with NextFifty Initiative. I'm Amy Daly, Director of Communications at NextFifty, and we are a private foundation that supports all kinds of programs and projects that benefit older adults and their caregivers. And today I am delighted to be chatting with Janine Vanderburg. She is the Director and Chief Catalyst at Changing the Narrative Colorado. Hello, Janine.
Amy, welcome. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for joining us. I'm so glad you are here today, and I'm excited to hear more about the work that you're doing. So let's get started with that. Can you tell me more about Changing the Narrative and what you're working to achieve there?
You bet. So Changing the Narrative is a campaign to really change the way that people think, talk, and act about aging and ageism. And we do that through evidence-based approaches and kind of innovative public campaigns. We started in 2018 with funding from NextFifty Initiative and Rose Community Foundation. And when we started, it was really about driving home the principles of reframing aging, narrative change about what it means to get older, changing the story that we tell ourselves and we tell the community. And that part continues. But one of the things we realized in 2018, I traveled across the state doing workshops. We did 42 that year. And in every single workshop that I did, it didn't matter urban, rural, frontier, suburban, someone would say, you know, that ageism thing that you're talking about in workforce happened to me, happened to my partner, happened to my dad. And I was really fortunate when I went back to my funders to say, you know, we can't just talk about reframing aging. We need to reframe the older worker. We need to really be talking more broadly in the community about ageism. Everybody was like, okay, you go. So, you know, that spirit of innovation that NextFifty is known for really helped us out there. So today we do a combination of community education and organizing. So we've been doing campaigns about ageism in healthcare and how to make healthcare more age inclusive. We have a campaign going on called the Age Friendly Workplace Initiative, for which the Denver Regional Council of Governments is going to be awarding us one of their Metro Vision Awards. And that really talks to employers about the benefit of older workers and intergenerational teams. We do intergenerational conversations, and we do general conversations about ageism. We also started getting engaged in policy research, knowing that very often the kinds of ageism that we're talking about, it's not just a matter of between two people, right? It's not just interpersonal. They're baked into institutions. So we've been doing research and I would say some education about where ageism gets embedded in public policy so that we can do something about it. And then finally, we do what I call like fun public facing campaigns. So, you know, last year we did an anti-ageist birthday card campaign, and we engaged Colorado artists to create cards that defy the stereotypes about getting older. And then we kind of went public with it, and that turned out to be really popular because it turns out that we really don't like getting those birthday cards that say our lives are all going downhill and there's nothing to look forward to. So we love doing public campaigns like that. And we, I think, to me, what happened during the pandemic, we started as Colorado-based. And then once we made our workshops and events virtual, like everybody did, in 2021, we ended up doing 94 workshops and events, reached over 6,000 people in every single state in the US and also in 24 countries outside. So the reach of Changing the Narrative, and I think people's desire to talk about ageism and do something about it, has really expanded. So that's what we're up to.
That is amazing. And you know, I know you're Changing the Narrative Colorado, but so much more now, right? It sounds like, with so much being virtual.
We're calling it Colorado and Beyond.
Yes, there we go. Colorado and beyond. How did you get involved in this kind of work, Janine? Like, has this long been a passion, or did something occur that brought you to this point?
So this is kind of a yes and. The yes is, and I've really reflected on this more recently about, so I've always been interested in social justice issues and people being able to use whatever their strengths and talents are. So I was always involved in the women's movement, involved, a big proponent of early childhood education, thinking, you know, not fair that some kids grow up with all the things and other children don't. But really what inspired me about this work in aging, and it's two stories about my mom. So my mom grew up in a French-Canadian immigrant household where the boys went off to college and the girls did not. So my mom graduates at the top of her high school class at age 16. And that's kind of it, right? So she does the things, gets married, has a family. And when she's 60, she looks at my dad and says, "Ray, I'm going back to school." And so she enrolled in college, graduated 4 years later, magna cum laude, and fluent in 4 languages. She was already fluent in French and English, but learned Portuguese and Spanish. So fluent in 4 language. And to me, that was just such a powerful example, right? That age doesn't need to form barriers and can be a matter of growth and contribution. The less happy story about my mom is that 6 years after that, after she graduated, she showed up at a local hospital with numbness in her legs. She was age 70 and she was sent home. Later that evening, she had a massive stroke. And so when I care deeply about ageism in healthcare, it's recognizing that some things that happened then still happen today, that as we get older, we are often misdiagnosed or underdiagnosed. And the other thing that has made me really passionate about addressing elder speak is I recall immediately flying out back east from Colorado and seeing, you know, the very well-meaning caregivers standing over my mom, who, remember, was fluent in 4 language, and talking to her, "Well, Mrs. B, how are we doing today?" Well, my mom had lost her speech, so she couldn't talk in any language, but her eyes were kind of cursing in all of them, I felt. So that's made me passionate about the issue. And I will say that the work that I've had the opportunity to do through changing the narrative in the last 4 years has just given me so many stories about why we can and must make things better. So that's what drives me today.
Yeah, we see ageism in so many different places, you know, from healthcare, like you mentioned, to just everyday life, the workplace, the grocery store. It really shows up in so many places. I'm wondering, why do you think ageism is so pervasive? Like, why does it just continue to be such an issue in our culture?
So, I mean, that's the question that keeps me up at night, because I feel like if we could figure that out, right? And I think there are a lot of theories out there. A colleague of mine named Tracy Gendron, who's a gerontologist in Virginia, recently wrote a book called Ageism Unmasked, and she talks about the history of aging, specifically in the US a lot. And, you know, part of the theory is that as we move to a more industrialized society, that the value of, you know, carrying on wisdom of elder and everything became about being faster, quicker, better, more productive. And so the wisdom of elders was more disregarded. I think there's another sort of theory about, as everything became more medicalized, or the medicalization of aging, and we started to view aging as a disease, that we all start fearing it, right? Aging, we buy into the narrative that aging is all about decline and deterioration. So there's a fear about it. And another thing that I'm really convinced of is, as we became more age segregated. So I grew up in a very intergenerational household. My grandparents were upstairs, my aunts and uncles were next door, and that kind of thing. So living with people of all, and my whole neighborhood was like that. So living with people of all ages was, you know, the way it became. But I think as you know, people moved away from their families and there are more age segregated communities. We have this thing called 55 plus living, and let's put, you know, the older people there. I think the more we become more age segregated, we don't understand each other and we don't see each other. So I think all of that contributes to allowing stereotypes and prejudice against people of another age persist. And I always feel at Changing the Narrative, it's really important to talk about the fact that ageism is not just directed against older people. Ageism is basically any kind of prejudice, stereotype, or discrimination based on age. So if someone is running around talking about entitled millennials or making stereotypical statements about people of another age, that's ageism as well. And I feel like we all need to be good allies, right? And support younger people and older people as well. But I think age segregation contributes to ageism directed in both directions, because if we're not spending time with each other, it's really easy to allow those stereotypes to fester.
Yeah, you bet. That makes sense. I think when I think about ageism, I often think about, especially in the workplace, I think about the tech companies with all the, the very young people and the high energy and the fast moving. I think about, those workplaces where older workers are not always welcomed. And I'm thinking about our audience. We mostly work with people who are already working with older adults. These are people providing all kinds of services, from healthcare to programs that benefit older adults. Why do people working with older adults in providing valuable programs need to think about ageism as well?
Great question. And here's what I hear from providers a lot, because a lot of the people who go to our reframing aging workshops are in fact service providers. They're very often NextFifty grantees. And what I hear is this: I think, one, people who work in this area have a deep and abiding concern for aging and older people. And I think they recognize that older people are often discriminated against and marginalized. So I think that's one reason. I think the other reason is all of us have to understand that ageism really is embedded in systems that end up putting providers in a, I'm going to say, in a secondary position. So there's a very strong us versus them. And I've heard from providers who've been going to testify to their town council or county commissioners about why they need funding, right, for their programs. And there's often that us versus them. But if we give you funding, we're not going to have funding for the youth or that kind of thing. So there's always a sense of competition. Whereas if we could reduce ageism in both direct, instead of seeing it us and them, it's we and us, right? And another factor is we know, we are so fortunate to have NextFifty initiative in Colorado. But we also know that overwhelmingly across the United States, the trend is away from aging in or funding in the aging area. And so it becomes harder and harder, even though as the population is aging and growing, it's harder and harder for programs to actually get funding. And that to me is an indicator of systemic and institutional ageism. So those are some of the reasons why we should care. And if we don't care about, for all of those reasons, the one thing we all have in common, right, is today for each one of us, it's the oldest we've ever been. It's the youngest we'll ever be. And so all of us are headed in that direction. So regardless of what age we are, if we're working with a provider, we are all someday going to face the dilemma of ageism if we don't solve it. I'm confident we're going to solve it, though.
Absolutely. Me too. Me too. What are some of the benefits? What are some of the benefits of educating people about ageism, changing behaviors? Like, what kind of tangible benefits will we see as a society when that happens? Because it will.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Amy. I love that positivity, because sometimes people look at our tagline, which is ending ageism together, and they're like, don't you just want to increase awareness? Isn't ending ageism a really big thing? And I'm like, yeah, it is. Let's do it. Yeah. So here are some of the benefits. So we know, actually, for older people ourselves, and I'm obviously putting myself in that category, we know that getting rid of our own ageist attitudes actually leads to better physical and mental health, memory, increased lifespan. There have been a series of studies by Dr. Becca Levy that show all of that. We know for society, if we eliminate the ageist barriers that sort of prevent older people from participating fully in society, then we create more opportunities for mentorship for older people to contribute to their communities' volunteerism. But we also know that there is an economic argument as well. Dr. Becca Levy had done a study that showed, for example, that ageism in healthcare costs the US $63 billion annually. And right before the pandemic, AARP released a study that showed that the cost of workplace age discrimination in the United States was estimated at $850 billion. And keep in mind, per year, and keep in mind, this was before the pandemic. And we know that during the pandemic, actually ageism in workplace age discrimination has actually increased. So, so there are economic reasons, right, for us to think about it. So whether it's for our own health or just community benefit or, economic, whichever one matters to you, there are really strong reasons to try to address ageism.
Right. Regardless of age, there is benefit to that. So to your point, economic, that benefits everybody.
Everybody.
Right? So what are you seeing? You mentioned some really important studies. I've seen a lot of really great studies coming out recently. Is there a trend? Are we making improvements in reducing ageism? Are we making progress?
So I actually think there's a lot of progress. And it's coming out in all sorts of places compared to when we started changing the narrative in 2018, where there were a handful of people talking about ageism. So one, a lot more people are talking about it. And as you've mentioned, Amy, a lot more research is being done about it. Here are some of the trends that I've seen. One, we now have celebrities talking about ageism, right? There's been a plethora of that in, the last year. And what's good about that is that it calls attention, right? Because, very high profile people are talking about ageism. So it raises the awareness of everybody. I would love to see these celebrities do more than talk about it, though. I'd love to see them advocate, for example, for stronger workplace age discrimination laws, but that may be our next step. Another really positive sign that I've seen is just literally the international collaboration going on. So the World Health Organization last year released its kind of report on ageism. Changing the Narrative is part of an international group that includes the World Health Organization, Help Age, Age Platform, Europe, a lot of groups in the UK, basically groups around the world who are making it a priority to put ageism on the human rights agenda. And there's a lot of collaboration there, sharing ideas, sharing findings, thinking about research together. We did a coordinated social media campaign. So that to me is a really positive sign that this isn't just a US thing. We've got people around the world talking about it. And the other thing, and this is going to sound odd to say, one of the positive outcomes of COVID with regard to ageism was, I think it really alerted older people to, there are people who really want to see us gone. I mean, that's the amount of dialogue that took place, from OK Boomer and Grandma Killer and that kind of thing. I think, and even from reputable sources about, well, really, if older people just, kind of stayed in their lane, then we could reopen the economy and that kind of thing, I think really alerted people who thought that ageism thing, yes, I may be getting older, but that ageism thing doesn't affect me. And how we've seen it changing the narrative is a dramatic increase in the number of people who've signed our Join the Movement form. Like they want to get involved in some way. They want to join our mailing list. They want to follow us on social media. We did a call this past fall. People signed up and they want to be speakers. They want us to train them to talk about ageism in their community. So that's how we can magnify impact. So I've seen that. And we've got an increased number of volunteers, which is really important to us because we're a really small outfit. But we now have more and more volunteers who are willing to, for example, to go out and talk to employers about the business case for older workers, and intergenerational team who are willing to facilitate our ageism and healthcare presentations and that thing. And so those are some of the positive signs that not only are people sort of increasing awareness, but they're willing to step up and do something about it.
I love it. I love seeing so many people get involved. And it is true. I just see it popping up more and more in mainstream media and in conversation. So I think, yeah, to your point, awareness has definitely increased for a variety of reasons, which is good to see. At least people are talking about it, and that can only help.
Absolutely.
So I kind of want to end on a positive note.
Yeah.
Although that was a positive note. What's one thing that we can all do, like something that every person can do right now to help end ageism and create more opportunities for the older adults in their community?
I think everyone can educate themselves. I'd encourage people to go to our website and, find the latest training. Educate yourself about ending ageism, about how ageism shows up in healthcare, how it shows up in the workplace. One of the things we always do in our workshops is we do a call to action. And so at the end, you can always find, here are some concrete steps. They may be very tiny baby steps. They may be a large leap, whatever it is, but everybody can participate in some way. And that's important because it's the one ism in a way that we're all going to face, right, if we don't solve it. So that's what I'm feeling really good about, is that people are stepping up, that people can educate themselves because there are a lot more opportunities for people to educate themselves now. So that's what I'm feeling positive about.
Okay, I love it. Thank you so much for the work you're doing, Janine. I think this is so important and it's making a huge difference, obviously not just here in Colorado, but nationwide. So thank you. And thanks for joining us today. I really appreciate it.
Amy, thank you so much. And I want to leave with this note. I really believe that in the words of civil rights leader, Grace Lee Boggs, we are the leaders we've been waiting for. So, it's kind of up to us. We really believe in the grassroots of changing the narrative. We are very appreciative of the investment that NextFifty initiative has made in addressing ageism, because we know very often it's not an appealing thing to fund. So we really appreciate your investment, not only in financially, certainly, but also in time. So thank you.